So recently I have found myself descending into a rabbit hole, as I am prone to do from time to time, and let me tell you, this one is wild. So you may know dissociative identity disorder by the term multiple personality disorder, or if you are just completely divorced from the psychological clinical zeitgeist, you might know it as schizophrenia, which is a completely different thing, not even in the same category that I have, which has nothing to do with DID. I won't go into too many of the details, but it's basically what people sort of imagine. It's one body and there's multiple distinct people in the head. Except, you know, it's not really like people imagine it, because they don't tend to be psychotic serial killers. They're just people. Like, take a bunch of people that you know, just randomly picked from the population, put them in the same body. Notice how you now also do not think of any of them as dangerous or even weird. These different personalities are referred to as alters, and though I will be dropping some of the clinical terminology that is associated with DID in this video and explain it, if you really want to get into the actual details and the science and all of the meat of really understanding what DID is, don't take my word for it, but check out DissociaDID. That's a channel from a system of people who have DID. I will link it down below in the doobly-doo and also the comments. Because yes, DID is 100% actually scientifically verified real science. It is in fact about as common as people with red hair, which means you probably know someone with DID even if they themselves don't know this. And really, if you think about it, 3% of the population refers to the individual systems, not all of the alters inside of those systems. So when you sort of scale that up, you come out with a pretty significant chunk of the population. And as a fair warning to anyone who is watching this who has DID, which is very much possible, I have been advised to tell you that I will be posing some philosophical and legal questions as to the nature of personhood and identity, and some alters, or maybe even some entire systems, might find this quite distressing. So if you have the option, maybe check in with whatever protector or caretaker would be responsible for this kind of thing within your system to, you know, ask if this is a good idea. I will also be asking a lot of questions and not answering any of them, because that's not really my job. The philosophers and policymakers and lawyers of the future are going to be the ones who have to inevitably answer these questions, but not me. Also, maybe don't look at the comments, because there's gonna be a lot of people watching this video who will have formed opinions about DID without actually knowing anything about it, or disregarding anything they are taught about it, and they will voice those opinions. So alters are individual, distinct persons. They not only have their own names, but they have their own likes and dislikes, tastes in music or food, their own skills, their own memories, even their own appearance within the internal world of the system. Some are religious, others are not religious. They have different religions, different denominations and worldviews. They even have distinctly different accents, body language, very often even noticeably different body chemistry if you were to measure that. So naturally, you might also expect them to have different political views. Which, I mean, it's bad enough to like live in America where you have to choose between the ooh and the ah party, but imagine you also have your MAGA hat wearing, assault rifle toting cousin, and also your neolibs did nothing wrong wine mum, living in your head all of the time. Now, it is one of the pillars of modern democracies to give each person one vote. However, I'm like 99% sure that no country in the world recognizes alters as their own individual people, legally speaking. They all share the legal identity and therefore rights of whoever the host of the system is. And so they get to vote once. So if one were to make a case that this is against the very spirit and ideals of democracy, that case might be pretty fucking good. Because if you don't, you'd be arguing from a standpoint that somehow some persons are less persons than other persons, and I mean, that's not really a philosophical or legal route you want to go down, because we have been there and it's not nice. However, there is no fixed number of alters that a system can have or does have. The average does appear to be at around 10. Now, 3% of the population has DID. You multiply that by 10. Now, 30% of the voting public is an alter in a DID system. Obviously, they wouldn't be a united voting bloc, but they would definitely be an interest group. Now, to be fair, if you were to give every single alter the franchise, most of them wouldn't vote, because most people do not vote. Some alters are also children, which we don't allow to vote on account of them not having a prefrontal cortex. However, they are in a body that has a prefrontal cortex, and a lot of those child alters are capable of perceiving the world in a way that an adult would. And also, they can be a child alter while also identifying with being over 18. And then you also have age sliding, which is a thing where you slide back and forth, and if 18 is somewhere in your age sliding line, if you go back underneath 18, do we revoke the franchise? I mean, how would you even test this or keep track of it? There's also the issue of alter complexity, because not all alters, you could argue, are really fully developed personalities. However, let's just say there's some pretty simple people with some very strong political opinions, and we generally do not see that as a reason to deprive them of the franchise. What about non-human alters? Because they exist. Really, the identities of an alter aren't constrained as much by the physical realities of the world that everybody else occupies. And given that they're usually born out of extreme circumstances, they can be pretty extreme. But at that point, do we give cats the franchise? Do we give it to dragons? What about dead alters? They exist. There's alters who identify as being dead, even though they are fully thinking people. Do we consider them legally dead? Because legally dead people don't get to vote, usually. This one actually, I think, is one that we can answer, and it is yes, absolutely they should get the franchise. If I were to identify as a centaur, I would still get to vote. Furries and otherkin, they get to vote, so obviously these people should too. It's definitely a question worth considering, but it's not really a complicated one. But once again, given the nature of the physical realities and them not applying as much to the identities of individual alters, an alter that identifies as a dog might actually be as smart as a dog. This opens us up to a whole different philosophical question that doesn't even apply only to people with DID, which is, where do you draw the line? How intelligent do you have to be, and how much of a moral agent do you have to be allowed to vote? A dog can be taught the concept of choice. It's not a particularly difficult thing to do, and it is proven that dogs are also capable of limited moral reasoning. But they don't get to vote because they don't understand politics. But what level of understanding of politics and the political system do you need to vote? Because there are some, stupid fucking people that can vote out there. And the full complexities of politics, most politicians don't even understand them. Also, how do you check which of the alters is currently in the voting booth voting? How do you make sure that the person that is claiming to be doing the thing is doing the thing? You could hook them up to a CAT scan, because different alters often have different areas of the brain that they activate, different neurological patterns that come out. Of course, you would need to have a baseline to compare it to. You would have to have them all archived, but even if you did all of that very complicated and expensive stuff, wouldn't that kind of violate the privacy of the holy act of voting? Also, people who hold the franchise also get to run for office, and legally right now even, the hosts of DID systems can run for office. But I mean, why can't alters run for office? Should we maybe even allow right now an alter to run for office if the host decides not to run for office? Would we then have a person that doesn't have access to the franchise but shares a body with someone that does have access to the franchise being an elected elected official? How do we make sure that the person we elected is actually the person making the decisions? If an elected office-holding alter integrates with a different alter, which is something that happens when the two of them become a new alter, do they lose their mandate because they are a different person than the one who was elected? Maybe you have two different alters in the same system that both got elected, potentially even for different political parties. Now, if they integrate, which isn't something that necessarily they choose to do, does the new alter hold both of those mandates? I know these are all extremely unlikely scenarios, but in order to be able to enact these kinds of laws, we need to be able to have protocols in place for these kinds of situations. Some countries have felony disenfranchisement. I don't personally believe in it, but maybe one of the alters in a system commits a felony. Does the whole system get disenfranchised? That hardly seems fair. And for that matter, does the whole system go to jail if one of the alters committed a crime for which one would go to jail for? I mean, that would essentially be you and the rest of your family going to prison because your uncle robbed a petrol station. Again, exceedingly rare cases, but in the interest of being philosophically consistent, we need to think about them. So you may have at this point formed a couple of opinions, so allow me to destroy them utterly by introducing a new variable, which, if you have been following the channel for a while, you know what's coming: the future. So the existence of dissociative identity disorder demonstrates that the human brain is capable of running several people at once, sometimes even at the same time. Now, for the next set of questions, we need to enter a new universe of meaning wherein we have to assume that we have obtained a very high mastery of the field of neuroscience and have an extreme level of technological sophistication therein. So at this point, technologically speaking, we wouldn't only be able to take an alter out of a system and place them in a new body, but also take different individual people and merge them into a system, potentially even while having them all keep their individual bodies, like a Borg hive mind. You may have noticed this is the point at which it's no longer really about DID. Now, if you think that every alter should get a vote regardless of the amount of bodies that exist, consider this. There are people with DID who can create new alters willingly. And with our new level of technological sophistication, we could make this happen in pretty much anyone very reliably. So if you strongly believe in your politics, you could just create hundreds of alters that believe in the same politics that you do and all reside in your head, and the only thing that they do is vote in favor of whatever political agenda you are in favor of. And in local elections, that could be a lot. If you instead believe that one body should get one vote, consider the fact that with the same technology, it should be pretty easy to just clone yourself a bunch of times into identical bodies that believe the same things, and then basically the same thing happens. So in both of these scenarios, the more money you have to repeat this process, the more you can hack democracy by just creating more voters. If instead you believe that people need to be distinct enough, so not just be simple copies of each other created in order to vote, which is legally very difficult, how different do they need to be? Because you could make the argument that if I was to clone myself right now, like there was another burger, he appears right here, already now a second after this cloning has happened, he would be a different person because he saw this shot from this perspective while I saw this shot from this perspective. And the divergence would only happen further from there. Plus, if we go back to the whole violation of privacy through CAT scans thing, with this level of technological sophistication, in order to make sure that the person who is saying that they're voting is actually the person that is doing the voting, you could definitely reconstruct who they're voting for. And that, even if you make it illegal to use that information, elections are not built on trust. Elections are built on mechanisms. All of these questions are questions that we really have to ask ourselves if we don't want to run into the obvious philosophical problems that are opening up to us. And this isn't even going into things like, what if someone were to pretend to have DID to vote multiple times? And if you say, well, you know, you need to be diagnosed in order for that to happen, are you really sure that you want to deny people the franchise on account of a very difficult to diagnose condition that people, they take years to even get that in there because of stigma and prejudice? Do you really want to have individual doctors who get to decide who gets to vote and who doesn't? If you want to learn more about DID as such, there's a great ecosystem of a lot of very interesting channels on YouTube. The main one that I tend to go to is DissociaDID, which again, you know, down in the doobly-doo. And also Anthony Padilla did an interview with several people with, well, systems that have DID. And that is indeed the guy from Smosh. And if I didn't make your head spin a little bit, at least I've made you aware of something that maybe you did not know about, which is people with DID. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities, but do not spam them. Consider supporting me on Patreon or Subscribestar, maybe buying my merchandise or my short story collection. And in that spirit, just like disregarding all the philosophical questions that we're asking today, be nice. Okay, I know you can be a rowdy bunch and that I like the fact that you are, but also I know that we're all capable of rational discussion and like being nice to each other. That's something that I'm very proud of in my community, that is possible. I mean, currently maybe not as much as usual, but you be nice to if there's people with DID in the comments, or if you're gonna go to the channels of people with DID. Fucking be nice and respectful. I'm serious. And see you around, cunts.